9 Tips to Grow Your Hoya Faster. Hey plant lovers, welcome to Earthly Delights, the place where we turn our homes into lush, thriving green spaces. If you're passionate about houseplants, always searching for the best care tips, or simply dreaming of watching your plants grow faster and fuller, then you're in the right place. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stared at your Hoya and thought, why isn't it growing? Did I do something wrong? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Hoyas have a reputation for being slow growers. But here's the truth. With the right care, they can grow much faster than you think. In this video, I'm going to share 9 proven tips that will boost your Hoya's growth, help it push out new leaves, and thrive like never before. These are tried and true techniques from my years of growing Hoyas, and trust me, they work. So, if you're ready to unlock the secrets to a faster growing Hoya, stick around. And before we jump in, don't forget to subscribe to Earthly Delights so you never miss a plant care tip. Now, let's get started. 1. Don't rush to repot. Let your Hoya adjust. So, let's start with one of the biggest mistakes plant lovers make when trying to speed up their Hoya's growth: repotting too soon. I get it. We all love the idea of giving our plants a fresh start in a new pot with a perfect soil mix. But here's the thing. Hoyas actually love being rootbound. Unlike some plants that need space to spread their roots, Hoyas thrive when they're snug in their pot. If you've recently repotted your Hoya and noticed it suddenly stopped growing, don't panic. It's completely normal. When you move a Hoya to a new pot, it shifts its focus from producing new leaves and vines to rebuilding its root system. It's like moving into a new home. You need time to settle in before getting back to your usual routine. I learned this lesson the hard way with my Hoya Joy Splash. It was growing beautifully, steadily pushing out new leaves, until I repotted it. Almost overnight, it just stopped. No new growth, no fresh leaves, nothing. And to make things worse, it even dropped the new leaves that were starting to develop. I kept wondering what went wrong. But after months of watching and waiting, I finally realized Hoyas take time to adjust after repotting, and there's no rushing them. So here's my advice. Unless your Hoya is severely rootbound or suffering in its current pot, leave it alone. If you do need to repot, choose a pot only one size larger and do it during its active growing season, spring or summer, so it has the best chance to recover quickly. And most importantly, don't repot when your Hoya is actively pushing out new growth, because that's when it's most sensitive to disruption. If your plant is struggling after a recent repot, be patient. Give it time to settle. Keep the conditions consistent, and before you know it, your Hoya will start thriving again. And trust me, once it feels comfortable, it'll reward you with new leaves and vines in no time. Now that we've tackled the repotting mistake, let's talk about watering, because if you're not getting this right, it could be the reason your Hoya is refusing to grow. 2. Watering right. Stop guessing. Now that we've talked about repotting, let's move on to one of the most misunderstood aspects of Hoya care: watering. If you've ever wondered, am I overwatering? Am I underwatering? Why does my Hoya just sit there doing nothing? You're not alone. Watering is tricky, and getting it right can be the difference between a slow, lifeless plant and a fast-growing, vibrant one. Here's the common advice you'll hear. Hoyas have thick, succulent-like leaves, so they don't need much water. And while that's partially true, it's also where many plant lovers go wrong. In fact, letting your Hoya dry out completely can seriously slow down its growth. When Hoyas stay dry for too long, they go into survival mode instead of focusing on new leaves and vines. Imagine trying to run a marathon without water. Your body wouldn't perform at its best. Right? Well, the same goes for your plant. I used to think my Hoyas preferred to be dry most of the time, so I'd hold off on watering until the soil was bone dry. But I started noticing a pattern. Whenever I watered, I'd see a burst of new growth. And whenever I let it dry out too much, the growth would stop completely. That's when I realized that consistent moisture is key. Not soggy, not drenched, but evenly moist for most of the time. That's why self-watering pots are a game changer for Hoyas. They provide constant access to water, allowing the plant to take what it needs without the risk of overwatering. If you're someone who struggles with watering schedules or has a busy lifestyle, Self-watering pots take out the guesswork and keep your Hoyas thriving effortlessly. But if you're using a regular pot, here's what I recommend. Don't wait for your Hoya's leaves to wrinkle before watering. At that point, the plant is already stressed. Instead, feel the soil. When the top inch or two is dry, it's time to water. And when you do, give it a good soak until you see excess water draining out of the bottom. Another important trick? Refreshing the water in self-watering pots. If you leave stagnant water in the reservoir for too long, it loses nutrients and oxygen, which can actually slow down growth. Replacing the water every week or two keeps it fresh and gives your plant the hydration boost it needs. So, to sum it up, Hoyas love consistent moisture, but they also need good drainage. Water deeply, don't let them dry out too much. And if you're using self-watering pots, keep that reservoir fresh. Once you nail the watering routine, you'll start seeing faster, healthier growth in no time. Now that we've got watering down, let's talk about the real secret weapon for fast-growing Hoyas: light. Because if your Hoya isn't getting the right amount of light, no amount of perfect watering is going to make it grow faster. 3. More light equals more growth. Now that we've covered watering, let's talk about something that can completely change the way your Hoya grows: light. Because here's the truth. If your Hoya isn't growing, chances are it's not getting enough light. A lot of people assume Hoyas are low-light plants because they can survive in dim conditions. And yes, they might survive, but they won't thrive. If you want your Hoya to push out new leaves consistently, you need to give it the right amount of light. I learned this lesson the hard way. When I first started collecting Hoyas, I kept them in medium light spots around my home, thinking they'd be fine. And guess what? They just sat there. No new growth, no fresh vines, just existing. But then I moved a few of them closer to a bright window. And within weeks, I started seeing new leaves popping up. That's when I realized light is the real growth booster for Hoyas. So, what kind of light do they need? Bright, indirect light is ideal, but if you really want to speed things up, try increasing the intensity. Move your Hoya closer to a sunny window, ideally an east or south facing one. And if you don't have good natural light, grow lights are your best friend. I use grow lights for a lot of my Hoyas, and the difference is night and day. The ones under grow lights grow twice as fast as the ones in regular room lighting. If you go this route, place your Hoya directly under the light, not off to the side, so it gets the full benefit. Now, what about direct sun? Some Hoyas can handle morning sunlight, but you have to introduce them slowly. If you suddenly put your plant in direct afternoon sun, you might end up with scorched leaves. Instead, acclimate it gradually. Start with an hour or two in gentle morning light. Then increase exposure over time. And here's a fun fact. Hoyas with variegation or splash markings need even more light to maintain their patterns. If your Hoya is losing its variegation or looking dull, that's a sign it needs brighter conditions. So, here's your action plan. Brighten up your Hoya's life. Move it closer to a window. Invest in a good grow light. And if you're feeling bold, start introducing it to some direct morning sun. You'll be surprised how quickly it starts to wake up and grow. And speaking of growth, there's one more thing that makes a huge difference: fertilizer. Because even with perfect lighting, your Hoya still needs the right fuel to keep producing new leaves. Let's dive into that next. 4. Fertilizing Smart. Feed for faster growth. Now that we've covered light, let's talk about something just as important: feeding your Hoya. Because here's the thing. Even if your plant has the perfect light and watering routine, it won't grow as fast as it could if it's not getting enough nutrients. Think of it this way: plants, just like people, need food to grow. If your Hoya isn't being fed regularly, it's like expecting a marathon runner to perform without eating. Sure, they might survive, but they won't have the energy to push forward. The same goes for your plant. I used to be too cautious with fertilizer. I thought, what if I give it too much? What if I burn the roots? So I barely fed my Hoyas, just giving them a weak dose once in a while. And you can guess what happened. They grew painfully slow. But once I started fertilizing consistently, everything changed. My Hoyas started pushing out leaves faster. Vines extended longer. And even the more stubborn plants began to wake up. So, Here's what works best. Feed your Hoya with every watering, but at a diluted strength. A balanced liquid fertilizer, something like the 10th of October 10 or 2020, is great for overall growth. If you're trying to encourage flowers, switch to one that's higher in phosphorus, like a bloom booster fertilizer. One of my go-to methods is using a 5-gallon watering jug and pre-mixing my fertilizer in it. That way, every time I water, my Hoyas get a gentle but steady supply of nutrients. If you're nervous about over-fertilizing, start with half the recommended dose and watch how your plant responds. You can always increase it gradually. And here's an extra tip. Fertilizer works best when paired with proper watering and light. If your Hoya isn't growing even with fertilizer, double-check those factors first. And don't forget, nutrients need to be refreshed. If you're using self-watering pots, make sure to flush out the soil every few weeks to prevent salt buildup from fertilizer, which can actually slow down growth instead of helping it. Once I got my fertilizing routine on point, my Hoyas went from being slow and unpredictable to steadily growing, month after month. So if you haven't been feeding your plant consistently, start now. You'll be amazed at the difference. Now, feeding is important, but there's another trick that can push your Hoya to grow even faster. And that's pruning. Yes, sometimes the best way to get more growth is to cut your plant back. Let me show you how. 5. Prune to stimulate growth. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why would I cut my plant if I wanted to grow faster? It sounds counterintuitive, right? But trust me, pruning is one of the best tricks to wake up a slow-growing Hoya and get it to start pushing out new leaves. Here's why it works. When you cut a vine, your Hoya sees it as a signal to branch out and produce new growth. Instead of putting all its energy into one long, leggy vine that might not even have leaves, it redirects that energy to create multiple new shoots. It's like giving your plant a little wake-up call, telling it, hey, time to get growing. I first discovered this with my Hoya Cloudy Sky. I had this plant sitting in my collection for months, doing absolutely nothing. No new growth, no fresh leaves, it was just there. So, I took a risk and chopped off a section of the vine, right above a node. And guess what? Within a few weeks, not only did new leaves start growing from that spot, but multiple new growth points appeared along the vine. It was like the plant finally decided to get moving. So, how do you do this correctly? Look for a long, bare vine that's not producing new leaves. Take a sharp, sterilized pair of scissors and cut it right above a node. This is where the new growth will emerge. If the vine has several nodes without leaves, cutting it back will encourage new shoots from the lower nodes, making your plant look fuller and healthier over time. And here's a bonus tip. Don't throw away those cuttings. Hoyas propagate easily in water or moss, so you can root the cuttings and plant them back in the same pot. This not only gives you a bushier plant, but it also speeds up overall growth since you now have multiple vines growing at once instead of just one. Pruning is one of those tricks that might feel scary at first. But once you see how effective it is, you'll wonder why you didn't do it sooner. If your Hoya has been stuck in a growth slump, try giving it a little trim. It might be exactly what it needs to start thriving. But before we get too excited about all this new growth, let's talk about something that could secretly be stopping your Hoya from growing: pests. Because if you're dealing with invisible plant enemies, no amount of pruning, watering, or fertilizing is going to help. Let's dive into that next. 6. Check for pests, invisible growth stoppers. Now, imagine this. You've got the perfect setup. Your Hoya is in bright light. You're watering just right, feeding it regularly, and maybe you've even given it a little trim to encourage new growth. But still, nothing is happening. If that sounds familiar, it might be time to check for something you can't see with the naked eye: pests. Here's the frustrating part. Pests don't always make themselves obvious. Unlike a yellowing leaf or a drooping vine, which are easy to spot, some pests, especially flat mites and spider mites, can be completely invisible until they've already done damage. And guess what? They love to attack Hoyas right where it hurts the most, the delicate new growth points. I remember noticing this with one of my Hoyas. It had been stuck in the same state for months, and every time a new leaf would start forming, it would dry up and fall off before it could even grow. At first, I thought maybe it was a watering issue, Or maybe the plant was just naturally slow. But then, I looked closer. And I mean really close. Like under a magnifying glass. That's when I saw it. Tiny, almost undetectable pests crawling on the undersides of the leaves, sucking the life out of my plant before new growth even had a chance. If you suspect pests, here's what to do. Start by checking the newest leaves and vines. This is where most pests go first. If the leaves look distorted, curled, or covered in tiny, dusty specks, that's a red flag. Also, gently rub your fingers along the stem. Does it feel rough or slightly bumpy? That could be a sign of flat mites. The good news? You can fight back. I personally swear by horticultural oil. It's safe, effective, and works wonders against mites, thrips, and other sap-sucking pests. Spray your plant thoroughly once a week for a few weeks to break the life cycle. And don't forget, treat all your plants, not just the affected one. Because if one Hoya has pests, chances are the others aren't far behind. Another trick? Increase humidity. Spider mites, in particular, hate moisture. So keeping your humidity levels above 50 to 60% can make it harder for them to thrive. Catching pests early can make all the difference between a Hoya that thrives and one that stays stunted for months. So, if your plant isn't growing, don't just assume it's a slow grower. Take a closer look. Because sometimes, the problem isn't what you can see, it's what you can't. Now, speaking of things that can silently affect your Hoya's growth, let's talk about what's happening beneath the soil. Because even if everything looks fine on the surface, your plant might be struggling where it matters most, its roots. Let's get into that next. 7. Root health. Hidden problems that stop growth. We've talked about pests lurking on the leaves. But what about the hidden issues beneath the soil? If your Hoya isn't growing despite getting the right light, water, and nutrients, the problem could be in the roots. And here's the thing, if your roots aren't happy, your plant won't be either. Roots are like the engine of your plant. They absorb water, pull in nutrients, and keep everything running smoothly. But if they're damaged, compacted, or worse, rotting, your Hoya might stop growing altogether. And the frustrating part? The leaves might still look fine. So you won't notice the issue right away. I learned this lesson firsthand when one of my Hoyas, which had always been a steady grower, suddenly stalled out. No new leaves, no new vines, just stuck. I checked everything, light, water, fertilizer, but nothing changed. So finally, I decided to unpot it. And there it was. The roots were dark, mushy, and smelled terrible. Classic root rot from soil that had stayed wet for too long. If you suspect root problems, here's what to do. Gently remove your plant from its pot and inspect the roots. Healthy roots should be firm, white, or light tan. But if they're black, mushy, or smelly, you've got a problem. Trim off the damaged roots with sterilized scissors. Let them dry for a bit, and then repot into a chunky, well-draining mix. And speaking of soil, your choice of potting mix can make or break your Hoya's growth. Regular potting soil is too dense and can suffocate the roots. Instead, go for something airy and fast-draining, like a mix of orchid bark, perlite, and coconut husk. This keeps the roots oxygenated and prevents them from sitting in soggy conditions. Another trick? Don't let your Hoya sit in a pot that's too big. If there's too much space around the roots, the soil stays wet for too long, increasing the risk of rot. That's why Hoyas prefer snug pots. They like their roots to feel secure before they push out new growth. So, if your Hoya is stubbornly refusing to grow, take a moment to check what's happening below the surface. Because a strong, healthy root system is the foundation of fast, steady growth. Now, we've covered light, water, nutrients, and root health. But there's still one more environmental factor that can make a huge difference in how fast your Hoya grows: humidity and warmth. Let's get into it. 8. Increase humidity and warmth. Create the perfect environment. We've covered everything from roots to pests. But there's one final environmental factor that can truly speed up your Hoya's growth: humidity and warmth. If you're wondering why your plant isn't thriving, it might not be getting the tropical conditions it naturally loves. Think about where Hoyas come from: lush, humid rainforests where the air is thick with moisture and temperatures are warm year-round. Now, compare that to a dry, air-conditioned room or a house in the middle of winter. See the problem? If your Hoya isn't growing, it might just be too dry and too cold to feel comfortable enough to push out new leaves. I noticed this when I placed two Hoyas in different spots in my home. One sat near a heater in a dry area, while the other was in my bathroom, where the humidity naturally stayed high. The difference? The bathroom Hoya grew almost twice as fast, while the one in the dry spot barely changed for months. That's when I realized, humidity is a game changer. If your home tends to be dry, there are a few easy ways to increase humidity for your Hoyas. A pebble tray with water underneath the plant can help, but if you want real results, a humidifier is the way to go. Keeping the air at 50 to 60% humidity makes a noticeable difference, especially for Hoyas with delicate new growth. Temperature also plays a big role. Hoyas are warm weather plants, they slow down significantly in colder conditions. If your Hoya is struggling, check the room temperature. Anything below 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 degrees Celsius, can cause sluggish growth, while ideal conditions are between 70 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 to 29 degrees Celsius. And here's an advanced trick. Bottom heat can supercharge growth. If you're propagating Hoyas or trying to encourage faster rooting, placing them on a heat mat can work wonders. The warmth encourages root activity, which speeds up overall plant growth. So, if you want your Hoya to grow faster, think about its natural habitat. Boost the humidity, keep the temperatures warm, and you'll be amazed at how much more alive your plant becomes. Now, before we wrap up, there's one last thing we need to talk about. Because sometimes, no matter how perfect the conditions are, a Hoya just refuses to grow. And the reason? It might just be in its DNA. Let's discuss that next. 9. Some Hoyas just grow slowly. Know when to move on. Now, here's something no plant lover wants to hear, but it's the truth. Not all Hoyas are fast growers. Some are just naturally slow, no matter how perfect their conditions are. And if you've been doing everything right, giving it bright light, proper watering, feeding it regularly, keeping the humidity high, and it's still not growing, well, it might just be the type of Hoya you have. It took me a while to accept this myself. I had a Hoya Rebecca that just refused to grow. I checked the roots, healthy. No pests. The lighting was great. The humidity was perfect. And yet, month after month, nothing happened. Meanwhile, another Hoya sitting right next to it was pushing out new leaves like crazy. That's when I realized, some Hoyas are just naturally slow. Genetics play a huge role in plant growth. Some varieties, like Hoya pubicalis or Hoya DS70, grow quickly and vigorously. Others, like Hoya compacta or Hoya callistophila, take their sweet time. It's just how they are. And sometimes, if you got your Hoya as a cutting or a plant that suffered from stress before you brought it home, it might never grow at the pace you expect. So, how do you know if your Hoya is just a slow grower? Or if there's actually a problem? First, compare it to others of the same variety. If you have two of the same Hoya and one is growing well while the other isn't, then it could be an issue with its care. But if all Hoyas of that variety tend to be slow, then it's just their nature. At the end of the day, patience is key. Some Hoyas take a few months to push out a single leaf, while others seem to double in size overnight. If your Hoya is slow, but otherwise healthy, just enjoy the journey. And if you really want to see faster results, consider adding a faster growing variety to your collection. Sometimes, the best solution is simply to grow a plant that matches your expectations. Now that we've covered all the tips, let's put everything together with a quick recap and some final words of encouragement. Because no matter what, every Hoya has the potential to thrive. You just need to give it the right conditions and a little bit of time. Let's wrap this up. Conclusion, recap and final encouragement. And there you have it. 9 proven ways to make your Hoya grow faster. If you've ever felt frustrated watching your plant just sit there without any new leaves or vines, now you know exactly what to do. Let's do a quick recap. First, stop repotting too often. Hoyas love being snug in their pots. Then, water consistently but don't let them dry out too much. Give them plenty of bright light. Grow lights can work wonders. And don't forget to feed them regularly to fuel their growth. If they're still stuck, try pruning to encourage new shoots. And always check for pests. those invisible enemies can stop growth completely. Make sure the roots are healthy and thriving in the right soil mix. And finally, increase humidity and warmth to mimic their natural tropical environment. And of course, if your Hoya still isn't growing, it might just be a naturally slow grower. Some plants take their time. And that's okay. The most important thing? Be patient and enjoy the process. Growing Hoyas isn't just about getting fast results, it's about learning, experimenting, and watching your plant slowly transform into a thriving, beautiful vine. Sometimes, the best part of the journey is seeing those tiny new leaves unfurl after weeks of waiting. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these tips are you most excited to try? Do you have a favorite trick for making Hoyas grow faster? Drop a comment below. I always love reading your experiences and learning from fellow plant lovers. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Earthly Delights for more plant care tips, tricks, and inspiration. If this video helped you, give it a thumbs up. It really supports the channel and helps more plant lovers find these tips. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, happy growing.